All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So, hello, Whale Week community in Savannah and all across the internet, whoever is dialed in right now. I am Paulita Bennett-Martin. I'm the Georgia Field Representative for Oceana and the co-founder of Whale Week. And Whale Week was born right here on the land of the Creek Nation people, now known as Savannah, Georgia. Every time of year around this time, every winter around this time, many North Atlantic right whales make their way home to the waters off of North Florida and Georgia for what we call calving season. They travel from as far away as Canada to find safe, warmer waters here in the South Atlantic coastal areas. This means many of the most endangered large whales on the planet are born right here within 15 miles off the coast of Georgia. This is why NGOs like Oceana, scientists from leading agencies like NOAA, educators from the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System, environmental artists, and more come together every year to participate in Whale Week. So before we get started on this panel discussion, and it's going to be really exciting, and we're going to hear from some awesome experts, I want to share a little bit of a story, because sometimes down here in the South, we're the southern end of this amazing whales voyage, and we don't talk about our history with the whale. So we'll take it from the top. At one time, before the era of whaling ended, right whale populations were estimated to be over 100,000 whales in the oceans. It's incredible. Then North Atlantic right whales were heavily hunted for more than 900 years. To this day, North Atlantic right whales have yet to recover fully from the pressures of historic whaling. By 1935, as whaling became illegal, less than 100 individuals survived. Right whales gained federal protection in 1973 with the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act. Then a very important discovery was made here in Georgia in the winter of 1981. I think it was January of 1981, with Charles Cohen, Hans Neuhauser, and Kathy Sakas in discovering a beached North Atlantic right whale calf on Little St. Simon's Beach off of the Georgia coast. In 1984, Scott Krause, a leading North Atlantic right whale researcher from the New England Aquarium, came down to begin studies on the whales in the South Atlantic region. Not having a lot of money for this study and not knowing much about what to expect, a group of young volunteer airline pilots from Delta, organized by Dave Mattingly, volunteered to help with aerial surveillance research, which documented many mothers and calves along our coast. And this pivotal grassroots kind of mission was dubbed the Delta Surveys. In 1985, following the discovery of this calving corridor and critical habitat just 15 miles off the coast of Georgia and North Florida, many of these people from this short story came together and they campaigned the Georgia General Assembly, and they asked that the North Atlantic right whale be made our official state marine mammal. So this is one of the signs of the state of Georgia. Human behavior over the next few decades would determine the destiny of the species. So we, all of us out there in Facebook land and in Zoom world, right? We're the humans that are coming together to ensure that the species has a chance for survival because we consider them the right whale to save. So tonight you're going to hear from three experts in their own rights. David Abel, the environmental reporter from Boston Globe and documentary and movie director. David will talk to you about making this specific documentary, Entangled, and about the experiences working in the Northeast fishing communities to learn about this. Clay George, a senior biologist with the Department of Natural Resources for Georgia. He is also a local disentanglement hero. So we're going to hear not only about the science that we know on North Atlantic right whales, but we're going to hear about some of those really scary moments working to save whales. And then we're going to hear from Brogan, who is our senior fisheries campaign manager for Oceana, the largest conservation organization in the world focused on protecting and restoring oceans. Gib will discuss some of the policies Oceana is working on to protect North Atlantic right whales. After we hear from the three of them, we'll open up the conversation for questions and comments from the audience. And we're going to start this off with showing you a couple of short pieces from Entangled. However, we want to throw this out there. The video quality may be a little bit slow, and that's not any reflection on the production of the documentary. This is because sometimes streaming on Zoom can cause a little bit of a lag. And so we hope you'll remain patient with us. And Sam, can you roll us a clip, please?
The right whale is an extraordinary creature. It's really one of the wonders of the living world. But if something in our management doesn't change, the direction of the population points to zero, and that's extinction.
The North Atlantic right whale is considered one of the most endangered species on the planet.
This will be the first large whale in modern history that would go extinct.
%85 of the right whale population now bears scars that indicate entanglement injury. This was a big problem, and it's an urgent problem.
It's a tragedy that we're losing the right whales. It's emblematic of large-scale changes that are happening on the planet.
Human beings can exist without biodiversity, and this is maybe a harbinger of where we're going.
We need to put as much pressure as we can on the agency to step up and take action right now.
I don't think the urgency can be overstated.
Human action is killing these whales, and human action has the ability to save them.
Lobstermen are stewards of the sea, and they don't want to entangle anything.
I sat here and listened to environmentalist after environmentalist tell me what a murderous individual I am.
My opinion about the whales is fuck them. What more can we do? Eventually, they're going to die off. It's going to happen no matter what.
As your governor, I will do everything I can to defend Maine's lobster industry in the face of this absurd federal overreach.
The challenge is to find ways for the fishing industry and the right whales to coexist in the same waters.
NOAA is the fox scouting the chicken coop. You're going to be fired for being a liar and a person who works to kill off the right whale.
One of the problems is that fisheries are one of the main factors that are endangering protected species. You end up with one organisation deeply conflicted with its mission.
All right, thanks for running that, Sam. David, could you start us off and tell us a little bit about what we just saw and about making this movie?
Thank you, Paulita, and thank you so much to Oceana for hosting this gathering tonight, and thank you to everyone who has joined us. So what you watched was a, how should I say, bastardized version of the actual trailer of the film. It's a little smoother without the fog of Zoom. But I should say, I'm going to speak briefly just to tell you a little bit about me and what inspired this film, and then I look forward to your questions. So I am, as said at the top, a reporter at the Boston Globe. where I have spent years covering environmental issues, which includes here in New England, fisheries and a lot about our oceans here. And over the years, I've come to moonlight as a filmmaker. And this is my third film about how climate change is having an effect on our ecosystem here in the Northeast, particularly in the Gulf of Maine, which is apparently warming faster than almost any other body of water on the planet. And that warming has had all kinds of significant impacts. Among them are the decline of our iconic cod species. And that was the subject of my first film called Sacred Cod. We've seen a decline of something like 90% of the cod population, which was overfished for generations, but was able to bounce back, but now has essentially remained in a dire state, arguably because of temperatures and the narrow band of temperatures that cod can thrive in. And after that, I made a film called Lobster War, which was also about how the warming waters here have affected the other iconic fishery here, lobster. And we've seen south of Cape Cod in Massachusetts, where I live, a 90% decline in the lobster catch. And on the flip side, we've actually seen a huge surge in the lobster catch further to the north, where the temperatures have reached something of a sweet spot. And that has ignited a conflict between the United States and Canada over these waters known as the gray zone that both the United States and Canada have claimed since the end of the Revolutionary War. So that was the subject of my last film. And while making that film, I learned a lot about the interaction between the lobster industry and one of the planet's most endangered species, the North Atlantic right whale. And in the making of that film, I learned about the primary cause of death of right whales and serious injuries to right whales, and that were and that was the vertical buoy lines, the lines that extend from the surface to the sea floor. And there are millions of those lines throughout the year in the Gulf of Maine and extend throughout the waters of Atlantic Canada. And that has been the predominant source of serious injury or death of right whales for at least the past decade and longer. And so while learning about that last year, I also came across and reported for the newspaper a story about how the United Nations estimated that by the end of this century, we are on target to lose something in the nature of 1 million species. And that statistic was really overwhelming and hard to understand and hard to fathom. And I thought, how do you even begin to tell the story about such a massive loss of biodiversity? And so I thought maybe the way to do that is to tell the story of one species, a particularly iconic one people can identify with. And so that is what led me to want to make this film and to look at not just the efforts to try to save this critically endangered species, which if you've seen the film says that there were about 400 left. And just in the past month, scientists revised their estimate to say they're closer to about 350 left, which is a catastrophic decline of this species, which in just the last decade has seen its numbers decline by something like 25%. And so I figured I would try to tell the story about the complexities of trying to save one species and how that impacts all kinds of things. And in this case, it's the nation's most valuable fishery, the lobster fishery, and the challenges for our regulators in the federal government of trying to balance their twin missions of promoting sustainable and thriving fisheries while trying to protect endangered species. So that's the substance of the film. If you haven't seen it, I hope you will watch it. And if you don't get a chance to watch it within the window of the screening period, we'll be sure to be able to share a link with you. But I look forward to answering your questions after.
Thanks, David. Yes, we have folks, by the way, please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat bar because we will have time to get to them at the end of the conversation. But we're going to move over now to Clay George.
Thanks, Paulita, for having me. I'm going to try to share my screen here so I can show you guys some photos of much of what David and Paulita have been talking about. Let's see. Can everyone see that whale tail up, sticking up in the air? Great. So, I guess before I get started, I want to first give a shout out to the many folks that help us do this work. Down here in the Southeast, we, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, work primarily with the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute, Florida Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA Fisheries. But this works, with right whales is possible because of work that's being done by dozens of partners that work together through the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium to conserve and manage this species. So let's see, am I having any luck moving this? Uh-oh, it's disabled my ability to advance. Here we go. Okay, so like Paulita said, you really can't talk about right whales unless you talk about commercial whaling, because the precarious situation the species is in today is the result of many centuries of use by humans, going back to whaling, and there were probably as few as 100 left by 1935 when they were protected. And that meant that most scientists by that point felt like the species was potentially functionally extinct already, and there really wasn't a lot of effort put into trying to find them or help them. But then some really cool stuff started happening in the late 1970s. One of the first was that folks from the New England Aquarium found an seasonal aggregation of right whales in the summer months up in the Bay of Fundy. Other researchers in the Northeast were also seeing them in places up north. Then 1,000 miles south, folks from my agency in 1979 photographed mother and calf right whale off St. Simon's Island. But that was 1,000 miles away from where these other right whales were, and no one really knew that was anything particularly amazing to see. And then, it wasn't until, this calf washed ashore at Little St. Simon's Island dead a couple of years later, and then another at Ossabaw Island a year after that, all of these pieces started coming together. And then a real cool story, like Paulita said, is how this group of volunteer Delta pilots that had their own aircraft came together with young Scott Krause at the New England Aquarium and decided to go out prospecting for right whales. The fellow on the left there, that's Dave Mattingly on the left, for those of you who know him. And lo and behold, they went out there and that first set of surveys in '84, they found 3 moms with calves. So that was really, really encouraging news. And then not only that, but they were able to match that, some of those animals to animals that they knew from their small photo ID catalog up north. So it became clear that these were the same animals that were moving up and down the coast. So through the 1990s and 2000s, much more was learned about the species. Several more feeding habitats were found in New England and Canada. We learned that the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Northeast Florida was really the only species remaining calving ground. They used to calve off the coast of North Africa on the other side of the ocean, but those animals have been extirpated, centuries ago. But then we also learned that that the species was increasing during that period. So they went from about 260 whales in 1990 to 475 in 2010, which just goes to show you that they can, increase in number if things are going well for them. By the time I started working with right whales in 2004, things were really starting to look up for the species in some ways. Each winter we were seeing 100 or more right whales offshore of Georgia and Florida, and dozens of calves. But there were also some storm clouds really, on the horizon, and it became increasingly clear during that period that recovery of the species was being hampered by largely two human activities. The first being collisions with ships, as this dead right whale on the beach in Florida shows, but also entanglement in commercial fishing rope. In 2008, NOAA established seasonal ship speed zones at ports along major U.S. Ports on the Atlantic coast. They also implemented new regulations for lobster, gillnet, and several other fisheries. And in Canada, the government there altered shipping routes to avoid summertime feeding aggregations. Ship speed measures seem to be working, but frankly, entanglement reduction less so. During the period of 2004 to 2010, we documented and responded to 10 reports of entangled right whales here in the Southeast. And really overnight, we had to become experts on, documenting and trying to disentangle whales. And this was only possible because we got a lot of hands-on training and help from colleagues at the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies up in Massachusetts, and Coastwise Consulting in Athens, Georgia. So when you talk about disentangling right whales, not only is it dangerous, and not only are you trying to help a critically endangered species, where especially in the case of females, every single individual is critical to the survival. Yet we have to take some chances, frankly, to get near them and try to cut this gear off of them. But it's also extremely frustrating because the whales don't seem to understand that we're trying to help them. They weigh 40 tons, so you can't immobilize them. And if they don't want you around, really all they have to do is dive and swim away. And so some entanglements in the end are fairly simple and relatively easy to resolve, like this photo of a right whale entangled in gill netting that was fairly simple and straightforward. But there are other cases that we've worked on that are extremely complicated, and really the whales just can't be saved. By the time we see them, it's too late. And a good example of this, this particular whale was seen entangled for the first time when it washed ashore dead in Florida. It had marks on it on the line that were consistent with gear from the Northeast U.S. trap pot gear of some sort. But the final cause is still unknown. But this animal was never seen alive. It was never seen in any location where anyone could go out and try to do something to help it. And it had a fairly simple, straightforward entanglement, just a bundle of line around its peduncle. It just really underscores the fact that we have to keep these animals from becoming entangled to start with. We can't fix the problem by disentangling every whale. So flash, forward to 2010, and we really start getting into this period where the status of right whales was beginning to change, that in ways that we at the time didn't really comprehend, and even now we're only really starting to understand. First, lots of whales started abandoning some of their habitats in places like the Bay of Fundy and other areas in the Gulf of Maine. About the same time, more and more animals started being seen in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they traditionally weren't seen, at least not in large numbers that anyone was aware of. The problem with the Gulf of St. Lawrence is that there was a high density of ship traffic and fishing gear. And at the time, there were no protections in place for the whales. And so what we saw was that in just the summer of 2017, 12 right whales were found dead in and around the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And altogether, 32 whale carcasses have been found in the Northeast US and Canada since 2017, rather. And that's just the ones that, that people have found. There's likely others that have died as well. During the same period, the other problem is that calving rates have fallen basically in about half. In 2009, we saw 39 calves in the Southeast US. In 2018, we didn't see a single calf. And that was for the first time since surveys began back in 1984. Just last month, we learned that, like David said, that the number of right whales has fallen to probably around 356, which is a full 25% drop in the abundance of the species in just 9 years. And these are animals that should be living, for a century. They have their life history is to live a long time, not reproduce very quickly, but be able to hedge over time by living a long time. And that's just not happening now. And the math is pretty simple, and it's frankly dire. We're killing them at unprecedented rates, and they just aren't producing enough calves to offset those losses. So like was mentioned before, the chief hypothesis of what's happening at the current time is that climate change has disrupted currents and temperatures, and the plankton populations themselves have been disrupted as well. And there's one species in particular, Calanus finmarchicus. There's a close-up photo here in the upper left that this species really specializes in. And they don't seem to be able to find that food in the densities that they need. And so what we've seen then is that what we've seen then is that if they can't make any more baby whales because the whales aren't getting fat enough to replenish their fat reserves after the previous calf, their calving intervals are extending out from 3 to 4 years, like they should be, to around a decade or more now, and so they're just not producing enough calves. And this probably also explains why the distribution shifted so quickly around 2010. So this gets us really to a potential solution. Firstly, we need to figure out these new places where the right whales are going. And we need to find ways of either slowing ships down in these locations, or when possible, have ships avoid those locations altogether. This has already been done in the US and Canada with some success, and there's no reason why it shouldn't continue to work. Secondly, we need to remove heavy fishing rope from the water column in these same locations. This will require significant reductions in fishing gear and/or large seasonal closures for fishing with this type of gear in New England and Canadian waters, similar to the types of seasonal closures that we already have in place here in the Southeast US calving grounds. Or fishermen could start using ropeless gear and coexist with the whales. Many ropeless systems are currently in development. Some are already being used commercially and in other countries. And as David's movie points out, most fishermen will never entangle a whale, and many of them probably won't ever see one. But collectively, the lobster and snow crab industries are entangling and killing right whales. Over 80% of the animals have scars from having been entangled in rope at least once. Approximately 60% have been entangled twice. It's a chronic issue that almost all of these animals in this species are dealing with. On top of that, the rope is getting stronger as the fishermen move farther offshore in search of lobster and crab. And what we're seeing is that the injuries are becoming more and more severe. So I think, in closing, the solutions aren't easy, but there are solutions that do exist. So, it's at a point where we're at a point with the species where we really have to make some decisions about whether we're going to move in those directions or not. We almost drove this species to extinction once, and if we don't act quickly, I'm afraid this time we might do it for real. So with that, just one thing to close on that's a bit of an up note. Our aerial surveys just started this week again for the 2021 calving season. And the great news is that our team from the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute found the first calf of the season this year off of Cumberland Island just this afternoon. And hopefully that's the beginning of a better calving season. We really need to see the animals get back to producing about 24 calves per year to get the population kind of moving back in the right direction. So thanks.
Thanks a lot, Clay. We're going to move on to Gib, and that is really exciting news, by the way. Thanks for sharing that.
Good news on a Friday afternoon. Let me share my screen here and see what let's see. This is going to work. Do you see that? You have my landing screen? Fantastic. My name is Brogan. I'm a campaign manager with Oceana, and we've been working on right whales for a number of years, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the problems and the solutions that are out there right now. As David's film did a very good job talking about the problems with fisheries and the need to reduce the risk of entanglements. Based on the previous rosier estimate of more than 400 right whales, we needed to reduce the risk at least 60%. And now that population has gone down, it's likely that we need to reduce the risk even more than 60%. And so there are efforts underway right now. We aren't starting from scratch right now. And we have binational efforts that are going on both in the US and Canada. And organizations like Oceana are working to press the governments in both the US and Canada to make those necessary improvements. So what do those improvements look like? First one on the fishing side, the way that we see it, is we need to look at the places where the right whales are known to aggregate. There are seasonal aggregations of whales, and we need to get the gear away from those aggregations. This area south of Nantucket has a seasonal aggregation of whales that it sometimes in the last year had 100 right whales sitting there. Last January, 100 right whales. And it just doesn't make sense to put fishing gear into that area. So we're working to advance what's called time area management to get the gear out of in the times and areas where the right whales are aggregating. We also want to have the governments have the ability, when they find right whales in places where they aren't expecting them to be, to close those areas. Send out a notice to the fishermen and say, there's an aggregation of right whales. Go and get your gear. The risk is too much. And so between those set times and areas and the reactive ability, we believe that we can reduce the risk significantly to the whales in these times and places. And we've seen that this works. We have seasonal closures in Cape Cod Bay that was highlighted in the film, and that allows the whales to do their whale thing in that season. And right now, the state of Massachusetts is looking to expand that closure to provide extra protection to the right whales. We also have examples in Canada where they have the reactive program. And in places where one whale is seen, each of these grid cells will be closed for 15 days. If another whale is then seen, that grid cell closes for the rest of the year. And the fishermen have an amount of time to go and get their gear and get it out of the water, but it reduces that risk and lets the whales feed in those areas. So we think that time area management is really critical to the success of rebuilding right whales. The other one is on the gear side of things, reducing the number of vertical lines. Having millions of vertical lines in the water poses a tremendous risk to the right whales, as was discussed all through the film. The fisherman that was going out, one of the things that was hidden in there and not really discussed is he was discussing that he was fishing 10 traps at a time, a long string of traps called a trawl. There are other fishermen that fish one at a time, called singles, and that for every trap there's a vertical line. So we believe that reducing those vertical lines is critical to the success of this, and that ropeless also fits in there as well. Ropeless is something that may go in with time area management, and that will provide an incentive to get the fishermen to use the ropeless gear if they can fish in the areas that would otherwise be closed to them. The other risk that we have is the risk of the shipping and the risk of vessels and vessel strikes. And to talk about vessel strikes, I'm going to talk about this mother-calf pair that's here. This is a mother that was recently named Snow Cone. And last winter, Snow Cone was seen east of Sapelo Island, Georgia, with a calf. And then this pair took off and went south, where most pairs either stick around or start heading north. This one went around Florida, up into the Gulf of Mexico, all the way up to Pensacola as a mother and calf pair. Came back down through the Florida Keys, came back up, and were last seen off of North Carolina. And when they got to North Carolina, they entered the gauntlet of vessel traffic. This is an image that shows an icon for every boat that is active in the Atlantic. And so this is an extremely active part of the ocean. And every one of these vessels poses a risk to the whales, whether it's a recreational boat, whether it's a giant commercial freighter like this one here that just set records up and down the East Coast for being the largest container ship to come to the United States, or recreational boats like this. This is one off of the East Coast of Florida with a mother-calf pair. They all pose a risk. And that risk is when the vessel strikes, either the propeller or the blunt force of the hull will either kill or injure the whale. And so we need to reduce that risk. And the federal government, as Clay mentioned, has taken steps to protect the corridor. There are required slowdown zones that will reduce this risk, and also to protect them when they're in the calving grounds. Some science has said that if you slow down to less than 10 knots, which is about 12 miles an hour, it can reduce the risk of mortality by more than 80%. So it's an effective tool, but it's not being implemented and enforced appropriately. And so that risk is still there, and it doesn't apply to the smaller boats. So unfortunately, in June, the calf that we had seen off of North Carolina and in the Florida Keys and in Pensacola was seen off of New Jersey dead. And the necropsy that was done on it said that this poor calf had been hit not just once, but twice, and that it had evidence that it had been hit by two smaller vessels. It had marks where the rudder had hit the whale, and also where the propeller had hit, both in the head and in the belly. And so this whale ultimately succumbed and never made it to the northern feeding grounds. So this is a sign that our vessel regulations aren't sufficient and they need some work. So what's on the horizon? There's change in the works, both on fishing and shipping regulations. As David's film discussed, the take reduction team rule is in the works, and the US government is revising or reviewing and possibly revising the vessel regulations. And we hope that strengthening both of those will improve things. Oceana is doing its part. We've created an analytical tool that lets us watch the vessels and watch their speeds. We can do it from space. And sitting at my desk right here, I can watch the vessels as they go through these conservation zones. And we believe that shining that bright light is going to improve the outcomes for the whales with the vessel traffic. Right now, everything's stuck in the White House. And we are very hopeful that with the change of administration, that these rules will move forward and that these necessary changes will happen and be on the water soon to give us optimism to jump out of the water and breach like this calf here. And we're hopeful that stronger regulations will help the right whales and get them back on the path to recovery. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can move forward.
Thanks, Gib. Lots of information, and we've got a lot of questions rolling in the chat bar. So let's see here. I'm going to start with a question for David. David, you spent a lot of time speaking with fishermen to make this film. Do you think there's an opportunity for conservation and fishing communities to work together? What are some of the ways you think this can happen? Or if you don't think so, what do you think are the roadblocks or obstacles?
Thanks for that question. I just want to first touch on one thing. Great presentations, Clay and Gib. Really informative. I learned a lot listening. Thank you for those. So Clay ended on a really positive note about the first calf to be seen in the calving grounds this year, which is great. But there actually, sadly, was a note of sort of dour news that actually the first calf to be born this year has been found dead, unfortunately, perhaps stillborn off the coast of the Outer Banks. So sadly, we've lost the first calf to be born this year, as we did, I think, last year. The first, or one of the first calves to be born last year was hit by a ship hours or days after it was born. So that just sort of illustrates the precarious state of the species. So, but to answer your question, Paulita, I would say that I was initially quite optimistic while I was making this film. As you can see, there is this really incredibly democratic institution, I think Clay is part of it, called the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team that Gib mentioned. And that's the spine of the film, where we see what I thought was going to be the ending of the film, where this group of scientists and federal and state regulators and fishermen and environmental advocates get together and try to come up with solutions. And in this case, they were this year tasked to try to find a way to reduce mortalities and serious injuries of right whales between 60 and 80%. And through long conversations, they came to what seemed to be this historic agreement, which would have in part reduced roughly about half of the vertical buoy lines in the Gulf of Maine. And all but one of the 60 or so members on the team approved this. And you see that in the film. And I thought, oh, what a great, good ending of the film. And of course, shortly after that, the industry and regulators in Maine pulled back and said they no longer supported the agreement, creating a whole, sowing all kinds of dissent, ultimately bringing us to the point that Gib mentioned, which is this regulatory black hole that we're in right now, where a year and a half after this agreement and this proposal and these regulations were drafted by NOAA, there has been delay after delay after delay, and we still have no idea what the agency is actually considering, and what could become of efforts to protect the whales. So so that's a sort of dispiriting note. But on the flip side, to end my answer to the question on a sort of more positive note, we see in the film fishermen like Rob Martin, who are serious about protecting the whales. They also, of course, want to see. He wants to see the closure of Cape Cod Bay and the other areas where he fishes ended. So he has an incentive to try to reduce the mortalities of right whales. But there are lots of fishermen who are supportive of taking reasonable steps that doesn't necessarily destroy their livelihoods, but does make meaningful take meaningful action to protect the whales. And hopefully we can sort of find enough common ground to do that.
Thanks for that answer. I'm going to go ahead and throw you another question because it sounds like you have a fan here that heard that you may be thinking about developing a film on right whale and vessel issues. Is that true?
Not that I'm aware of yet. I'm not quite sure what the next film project will be. But we'll see. As I've said before, this is very much an ongoing story. It was a difficult film to end. We created we recut the ending of the film several times as we were trying to complete the film this past spring. And there are just all kinds of developments that are happening. So this is a very live story. And maybe there'll be a sequel. We'll see, but I don't have plans yet for that.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not sure who would answer this, but Clay, this might be a question for you. Who reports seeing a whale? I'm wondering if they're thinking, who's responsible for reporting this, right? They write, my understanding is that it's not a fisherman's interest to report this. I'm interested to know if the whale, and that's it. We'll end there.
Okay. As far as how we get our data, most of the data come from researchers that are out there actively looking for whales, whether it's through aerial surveys or boat surveys. There's a lot of work being put into detecting whales acoustically, passive acoustically through their calls, which is really pretty neat, high-tech stuff. There's also an active system to try to get real-time sighting information from boaters and other members of the public. There's several 1-800 numbers you can find online for that. And there's even down in Florida where the whales come pretty close to shore. There's a volunteer network of people who sit up on tops of condos and look for whales as they swim up and down, the beach down there in Florida. So there's any number of ways that we find out about the whales. The probably the most important thing we're looking for in our surveys is photographs of them, because that's how we, each whale's uniquely identifiable by the time it's about a year old. And so that's how, when we say there are, an estimated 366 right whales alive right now, that's possible because of photographs of these animals being resighted through time. As far as whether it's in the interest of fishermen to report sightings or not, I can't really speak to that. I can say from the standpoint of dealing with reporting of entangled whales, that is something that is concerning, because there was a lot of effort in the Northeast, a lot of effort put into in the Northeast to getting fishermen to report entangled whales so that responders up there can get out there and disentangle them. And I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that, if you're collecting gear that, might implicate their fishery, then perhaps it might change their willingness to report. I hope it wouldn't, because in the end, I think it's in all of our interests to see to it that, as many of the whales are protected as possible.
Just an important note for the public that's out there: if you do see a right whale, stay away from it. 500 yards is the closest anyone should be, unless you have a a permit to get closer. They need their space.
So off of that, if someone does happen to be in a boat or see one in the water, what's the protocol? It's to back away, correct?
Clay would know better than I do.
Yeah, that's correct. Recreational boaters come across right whales down here in the southeast, and the direction they're given is that you should, certainly stop. And if it's incredibly close to you, sometimes it's best to just keep the boat in neutral and wait till the whales move out of the way on their own. But otherwise, yes, to boat slowly away. It's important to remember that anytime you see a right whale, there could be other whales around. So one thing we always are trying to point out to boaters down here is that they should keep a sharp eye, because these animals are often just below the surface, not unlike the way manatees are, which I think everyone's aware manatees can often get hit by boats down in Florida waters. So, but not only just for the whale's sake, but there have been cases where boaters have hit whales and caused great damage to their own boats. I mean, these are, after all, 40-ton animals, and if you're in a small fishing boat offshore, the physics aren't in your favor. People just need to keep a sharp eye out.
Thanks. Okay, this question is definitely for Gib. Hearing that there are less than 400 North Atlantic right whales left is very sad, and it's clear we need to take action now. How do we mobilize people to take action or care when it is easy to become paralyzed by low population numbers?
Yes, I think the big answer is that we have been in a similar situation before, and these whales have recovered. There is a role to the second question. There is definitely a role for the public here. They are, as the government calls, everyone is what the government calls stakeholders. You all have a stake in healthy oceans and abundant whale populations, and you all have a voice. And the government has public comment periods where they put their ideas out for the public to review and comment on them, and everyone has the ability to send in a note. Oceana is very good at bringing the public into this process and giving people the notification and the opportunity to put those comments in, and the government has a job, that obligation even, to review those and comment on them and take those into consideration. So as we move forward with, hopefully soon, we'll see the new proposal for the fishing regulations. We hope that we're going to have a lot of members of the public speaking up for the whales and speaking up for strong conservation policies that will reduce this risk and let the whales recover.
Excellent. Okay, and the next thing that we'll ask is, how will improved ropeless fishing gear impact the future of North Atlantic right whales? Are there any tax incentives from fishermen who use ropeless fishing gear, or maybe financial programs that could help fishermen purchase ropeless fishing gear if it's expensive? If ropeless fishing gear is implemented on a mass scale, would there still be closures or line removal, or would there still need to be? Not sure who wants to take that.
I guess I can get at that one. Most of the ropeless gear is in the testing phase. There are pilot programs in the US and Canada that are, the goal is to just get it in the hands of the fishermen, to let them try it out and torture test it and see whether it works, not just in a swimming pool, but in Cape Cod Bay in the middle of January when it's cold and their fingers are frozen. There are also grant programs that are out there that are funding this to get the gear out on the water. And so that's the status right now. As we move forward, the way that ropeless is discussed right now is that the boats that use it will likely have some exemption from closures. So they'll be able to continue fishing there. And so the idea is that will be an incentive, that if you use ropeless, you'll have access to this gear to this area when nobody else does, which should be a financial boost for those boats.
And just to clarify what Gib was saying, at the moment, by law, as I understand it, ropeless fishing is technically not legal right now on a commercial fishermen. So so the laws or the rules will have to change to allow for that to happen. So what Gib was saying is what is believed to be the thinking of federal regulators in the draft rules that allegedly are at the White House, and we don't really know what they say or what they're going to actually propose. But the hope or the notion is that they will allow for ropeless fishing, and that they might provide various incentives, such as allowing ropeless fishing in closed areas.
Yeah. And just one other thing on the cost. Ropeless is very expensive right now, but as one of the government representatives said at a meeting earlier this week, if you had handed somebody an iPhone 15 years ago and said that a current iPhone with that kind of technology, it would have been extraordinarily expensive. But as they scale it up and refine the technology, it's going to get cheaper and far more practical to be used widely across the fishery. It's not always going to be this expensive as the prototypes are right now.
But I would just leaven that optimistic note by saying that yes, that is the hope, that with economies of scale and mass manufacturing and competition, you'll bring down the price. But right now, the prices of a ropeless fishing system is exorbitant. It could be in the six figures to equip just one fisherman. So right now it's completely unfeasible economically. And it seems to me that even if you manage to bring the costs of manufacturing this technology down, it would require some form of federal subsidy, some sort of federal help to actually enable the 5,000 or so lobstermen in New England to make that transition. And we do that for other agricultural purposes. We provide billions of dollars of subsidies to all kinds of farmers. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could choose as a society to help fishermen make this transition.
Important things to think about there. All right, so one thing I want to point out too, that David just mentioned with ropeless in the film, if you haven't watched it already, which I know some of you are waiting till after the panel discussion to watch it, you'll get to see some examples of ropeless fishing gear. So you'll see kind of what people are working on in these earlier stages. I have a question now for Clay. And this might have to be our last question because we are running out of time, but there are many more questions to be answered. So I advise everyone to keep in touch. Clay, can you tell us why North Atlantic right whales matter? What is their role in the oceans in our life? Many species go extinct. Why would this be any different?
Yeah, I think that it's the simple answer, and David kind of gets at this in his movie, is they're a canary in the coal mine, really, for what's going on in our oceans. And if right whales can't find food in the Northwest Atlantic because plankton populations have shifted that so dramatically, that's probably having impacts on other animals, probably on some animals that we find, some fish stocks perhaps that we find commercially valuable. It's really tough to track some of those smaller animals, especially under the ocean surface of the ocean. But we're able to follow these right whales, and they're telling us that something is changing, and we need to take notice.
Well, that's really important for us to think about, right? It is a symbol for something much larger than just the one single species. But we are coming up on our hour now, and I think that we could continue talking about right whales for days. But instead, what I'm going to do is make sure that we close up with some important information so that you too can take part in protecting whales when there are opportunities. So one of the things that we wanted to point out is that there's a number, again, people put it in the column. I thought I saw it in the chat column already. It's a number that you can call if you happen to be on the water or by the water and you think you see a North Atlantic right whale. You should report that. And that is the 1877 whale help number. If you want to keep up with ways to take action for North Atlantic right whales, you can go to oceana.org/right whale to save. And all of our campaign work for Oceana is on that page. You can find reports and petitions to sign and more. And then something else, if you like the film, which I'm sure who's not going to enjoy this film, I recommend that you share that link. People, your friends and family can also rent the film anytime that they want. Tell them about it, engage, educate your neighbors, educate your friends on this, and ask them to check it out. And, I want to say thank you on behalf of Whale Week for coming out to hear us chat about North Atlantic right whales today. I want to send everyone a happy holidays. And we have a lot of great work to do together to protect these great whales and oceans. Anybody else want to say a farewell to the audience?
Thank you so much, Paulita, Gabe, and Clay, for sharing your wisdom and for providing this opportunity for us to share our film. So we hope everybody enjoys it, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Paulita.
Thank you. Bye guys. Have a great night.
Night.